Okay, let's talk about how to leave an abusive relationship. Now, before we can talk about how, we have to talk about why. Now, in December, I met a writer who's currently writing a book about abusive relationship. Now, this is a man who can admit that throughout his life, he hit women. He was an abuser. And so now he's writing a book for men and for women so that they can prevent this situation in their lives. Now, I was really deeply impacted by this man's story because this man had a daughter who ended up in an abusive relationship. And luckily, this daughter had brothers, and their brothers found out about the abuse, and their brothers went over to the man and threatened him. Now, this man, he backed off. Some people won't. A lot of abusers won't. A lot of abusers ain't scared of nobody. But this man, he backed off. They ended the relationship. And the thing that got me is the very next woman this abusive boyfriend got with, he killed. And that could have easily been the abusive writer's daughter. That could have been her. Sometimes, as women and as men, we don't realize when we are being hit and choked and smothered. We don't realize how close we are to death. This abusive relationship thing, it can really be a life or death situation. Okay. Now, let's be clear. The solution to your abusive relationship is not asking men to intercede on your behalf. I have met men who have served time in jail and prison for protecting a woman who was being abused. And I know of men who have been killed by a woman's abusers, even when they were trying to have peaceful negotiations. So we don't want to endanger the men who love us. We don't want them to be prosecuted, and we don't want them to die. Now, sometimes we do need help getting out of an abusive relationship. Now, before we talk about how to get help, we're going to talk about verbal abuse, because sometimes, especially as women, when we're being cursed out and called out of our names, sometimes we don't think it's a big deal. Sometimes we feel like we deserve it because we have all these imperfections, and we start to agree with the men who are cursing us out on the regular. Now, what we must remember is our daughters are watching, and our daughters might get so used to their mother being abused that they just think is how men talk. They don't even realize that there's other options, and what might just be verbal for you in the future might be verbal and physical for your daughter. And even if it doesn't get to physical, you have to get to a point where you realize you deserve to be talked sweetly to. You deserve not to be cursed out. You deserve to be treated like the wonderful, beautiful, intelligent genius that you are. Okay, now let's be clear. This verbal or physical abusive relationship is impacting your career. It might be causing you to lash out on your children or your friends because maybe you can't get to the person who's physically or verbally abusing you. And overall, I guarantee that you are not as productive in an abusive relationship as you would be on your own or in a healthy relationship. And ladies and men, if you do not find the healthy relationship, you're better off alone. Even if for the rest of your life you never find a healthy relationship, you're better off by yourself. Just hanging out with your friends, taking care of your children if you have them, adopting children if you don't. It's better to be alone. Okay, now the hardest part of actually leaving is not leaving. It's not getting away. The hardest part is staying away. Now, people, you have to realize that you might love this man. This man, even though he abused you and he called you all types of names, you might love him. That might be true. And honestly, it might be the best sex that you ever had in your life. You might like his career, you might like the degrees, you might like the house and the cars, you might like his friends, his family, and you might love his mama. But none of that matters, because none of those things are worth you being abused. Now, people say it takes 3 weeks to form a habit. So let's start there. For 3 weeks, you need to physically and verbally and emotionally separate yourself from this man who has been abusing you. I personally recommend domestic violence shelters. I've stayed in a few myself. I think it is a great way to physically separate yourself from someone you might be used to having sex with. Even if the sex was violent, you know, you might like it. So it might be difficult for you to destroy that yoke. So the first step is just taking 3 weeks and not seeing him. The next step is to get into counseling. Even if you think you are okay, even if you think you are the strongest woman or man in the world, being verbally or sexually or physically abused can affect you subconsciously in ways that you haven't even realized. And you might not realize it until you actually start to talk to someone and someone starts to repeat the things that you have been sub-vocalizing to yourself, and you start to realize, man, maybe this has affected my self-esteem. Maybe this has affected my self-image. Maybe this has affected who I am. Okay. Now, the third step is I recommend getting an accountability partner. Now, you might not want everybody to know that you were being slapped and choked and you had black eyes, and you might not want people to know how that bone actually got broken. You might not want people to know that you were being knocked unconscious. These things might not be anybody's business. But if you can find one person and you can trust that one person to tell them what was really happening, and that one person can be your accountability partner. And every time you want to have sex with a man who abused you or woman, every time you want to talk to them, because let's face it, they were your confidant. They were abusive, but they were there. Every time you want to go back there, you call this accountability partner. You call them, you text them, you email them, you Facebook them. Maybe if they let you over, you show up at their door. And this accountability partner and this counselor and this domestic violence shelter can help you change your life. Now, I also recommend making a list of 100 things that make you happy. And every time you get lonely and you get depressed, because this person you might feel like is the only person who ever loved you, and even though they abused you, they loved you, pull out this list of 100 things and find something that makes you happy on this list. I also recommend keeping a diary, letting it out, journaling. I also recommend going to church, praying, meditating, and doing yoga. Now, if you go to church, you might be tempted to pray for your abuser. You might say, God can change this man or woman. And it's true. God can. God can change this person. But you have to get to the point where you realize that you do not deserve to be hit or choked or abused or raped. You do not deserve to put up with that for the next 50 years while God is changing their life. Yes, God can change them, but they might be 80 years old by the time they change. And you don't deserve to be knocked out for the next 50 years while you're waiting for this person to change. I'm not saying that they can't change, because they can. I'm just saying that you don't need to be there while they're trying to change. Okay. So there will definitely be videos in the future. Remember that you are a genius and you deserve the best the world has to offer. Okay. Remember, never be ashamed.